Welcome to Voices of Truth One-on-One with Hawaii's Future, brought to you by the Kiwani Foundation. I'm Ehu Kekahu Cardwell, and here we are today on the north shore of Oahu. And I'll tell you this right now, we have a fascinating guest on the show, so let's go on over here and meet him. Isaiah, aloha. How are you? Isaiah Walker, did I say your name right?
Yeah, correct.
Wonderful. And Isaiah, tell us exactly where we are today.
So we're at Malaikahana Beach Park, and Malaikahana is also the name of an ahupua'a in between Laie and Kahuku.
Wow, wow. And I can hear and smell and almost see the surf right over the hill behind us.
Yeah, so there's a lot of waves today at this time of the year, and February, we still have a lot of those big north swells.
Yes.
So this is a great area for surfing and a lot of history and culture here too.
Wow,
Yeah.
wow. A lot of stuff going on here.
Yeah.
So Isaiah, we wanted to have you on the show today because you yourself are a surfer, yes?
Correct, yeah. I started surfing when I was really young, actually about 4 or 5 years old. I grew up on the big island of Hawaii in Hilo. And actually my grandmother surfed in Waikiki, so she was Abigail Ka'ehu Kalani, and she grew up in Waikiki and was a surfer at a young age. So it was something that was passed down through our family. So I was fortunate enough as a young kid to grow up surfing too.
Wow, so you surfed literally your whole life.
Basically, yeah.
All right, great, super. But you're also something else that's interesting, which is you're a professor of history.
Correct.
At Brigham Young University here in Hawaii.
Correct.
What history do you specialize in?
So mostly Hawaiian history, but I've focused on the way that I teach and my scholarship that I do with Hawaiian history is through the lens of surfing. Yeah.
So there's examples or metaphors of surfing that you use to teach people concepts of history, yes?
Correct. But also surfing, or what we call he'enalu, in the Hawaiian term for surfing, is so deeply ingrained within our culture and our history that it's almost impossible to separate them.
You can't teach history without talking about surfing, yeah?
Yeah, in my opinion, especially when you look in a lot of the stories of the mo'olelo, the histories that we have. I mean, from great chiefs to women to commoners to so many different components, even to the gods. There's usually a layer where in the story, surfing is a part of that story.
Somebody picks up a surfboard and goes surfing.
Yeah, correct.
Wow, super. So give us an example of how that might show up in a piece of history you're talking about.
Right, so let's take this place, Malaikahana, is named after actually an individual in the story of Laie Kawai. So Laie Kawai is an epic story,
yes.
And it's about 100 pages long.
Yep.
And the story goes where there's a mother, starts off in chapter 1 with a mother, and her name is Malaikahana, and her husband is Kahau Kapaka. And together they give birth to these beautiful daughters. But unfortunately, her husband, Kahau Kapaka, wanted a son to be the chief, to be the firstborn. So unfortunately, each time they had a daughter, he had them killed. Eventually, Malaikahana was really fed up with this, and so by the time she gave birth to Laie Kawai, she had twins actually, Laie Kawai and Laie Lohe Lohe. And she didn't want her husband to kill her daughters, of course, and so she sent him on a wild goose chase to go and find this very rare kind of fish. And when he was gone, she quickly gave birth to the twins, and then she hid them out. Right across the street over here is Waiapuka, and Waiapuka is the cave. It's like an underground cave with a pond that her grandma Waka hid the children in this nearby cave. Now, eventually they go on and they survive this story of hiding from the dad, and they have to move. So they move to the Big Island, and they hide out in a place called Paliuli, which is this beautiful forest in Ohio Forest on the Big Island in Puna. That's when surfing becomes a part of the story. So she goes to the ocean, to the beach to go and surf, and she's at the age where she wants to get married, and her grandma Waka is very particular of who she allows to marry. So Waka finds a guy that she sees as a suitable person for her. He's a chief from Kauai named Kekalukalu o Kewa. And he comes over to the Big Island looking just for her, because there's all this legend how beautiful she is, and everywhere she goes, the rainbows follow her. And when they arrive, the canoe arrives at her area there on the Big Island, He comes in with all these canoes and a whole entourage, and it's all to impress her. And so Waka tells Laieikawai, go and check him out from a distance. He'll be the one out there surfing. So she goes and watches them surf, and this is from where the story really embeds with he'enalu, or surfing. So after she sees him in the surf, she decides, okay, I'll go ahead and date this guy.
He's an impressive surfer,
impressive surfer.
Yes.
And they decide the way that they would solidify their marriage is in the water. So the ritual was they would go out and surf together and catch 5 waves. And on the 5th wave, they would ride in together, and it would solidify their commitment to each other. What she didn't realize is there was a local surfer on the Big Island that wanted Laieikawai and was annoyed by this chief from Kauai that was coming to take her. So as they were catching the 5th wave, Hala'aniani, the local surfer from Kea'au, grabs Laieikawai's foot and pulls her away from the wave. Ke kalu kalu o ke wā keeps on the wave, and she's sort of puzzled, like, what just happened? And so this local surfer has a way of sort of intervening with the marriage in the waves, and he takes her off to a different spot, and then somehow she ends up falling in love with him, and those two get married. So the story goes on, and there's much more to it, but that's just an example of how integrated he'enalu, or surfing, is with our history and our culture.
Surfing changes history.
For sure, certainly. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. All right, so when you are in your classroom and you're teaching your students about this and they hear this stuff, what's their reaction?
You know, most people know surfing, right? Because it's such a global phenomenon.
But how many people know the story of Laieikawai?
No, very few.
Very few.
Very few.
Very few. And
so
yet it's a very famous story.
Right. And so that's where I think people are intrigued, and maybe your viewers as well, is that realize that surfing is not just a product of 1950s California, Gidget, and Malibu, which is a cool part of the story, but it has so much deeper roots that trace all the way back to hundreds, if not thousands of years in Hawaii.
Well, that's the Hollywood part of surfing.
Right.
What you're talking about is the real stuff.
Right.
It's where it started. I mean, it started right here.
It did.
Started in Hawaii.
It did start in Hawaii. So it is something that I think for Hawaiians can take great pride in, that, surfing, the birthplace of surfing is here in Hawaii, and it's gone global, and it's such a world phenomenon. And so it is another one of our innovations that we've contributed to the world.
And it's an ambassador of Hawaii to the world.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people may be familiar with the name Duke Kahanamoku, especially if you've been to Hawaii. And he was kind of called the Johnny Appleseed of surfing in many ways, as he was touring the world in the Olympics. Everywhere that he went, he would have an exhibition for surfing, and people were just, mesmerized by the idea of somebody literally walking on water with a surfboard.
That's right.
And so that's kind of where a lot of it spread, was through Duke Kahanamoku, but there were others as well. Even before Duke Kahanamoku, Prince Jonah Kuhio went to California, 1880s. He was at school there with his 2 brothers, and they surfed in Santa Cruz and also had a big exhibition. And so
and everybody came down to see it.
Right, everybody came down to see it.
At what point in your life, how old were you, when it dawned on you that surfing can help tell any story, and surfing is inextricably a part of history, no matter which way you look at it? When did that dawn on you?
I think when I was in college, I was studying history, and I decided to write a research paper on surfing. And initially, some of my professors kind of looked at me funny, like, is this a legitimate topic?
This guy's trying to get off easy.
So it was my job to convince my critics that surfing was a legitimate topic of history, and that I could take a scholarly approach to it. And then once I started to do that, and I delved into a lot of the oral histories of the mo'olelo in a lot of our Hawaiian language sources, and found that it was even more prevalent than I assumed. And so then I realized, wow, there's something really legitimate about this as a scholarly topic. And it was also a great way of telling the story of Hawaii, and even things like the annexation and overthrow. And by following surfing during all these times in our history, when there was a lot of change and a lot of chaos and innovation and all the changes that history brought, as I followed surfing through those time periods, I was able to tell a story from a very different vantage. The ocean itself, and particularly surfing, was a social space that offered an alternative place for Hawaiians to exist outside of some of the politics that were taking place on land.
Yes.
So one of my contentions in my book called Waves of Resistance is that during the time when there was a lot of struggle on land with colonialism, the ocean became a kind of pu'uhonua, or an escape, a sanctuary for a lot of people that felt like they needed an escape. And because Hawaiians were seen as experts in the ocean, whether it was surfing or canoeing or fishing and diving. In fact, that was when Captain Cook came to Hawaii. One of the first things he notes in his journal is how comfortable the Hawaiians are in the ocean. And he witnesses surfing. And he's mesmerized by it, but he's also intrigued by how brave and daring they were at it. So because the ocean was in some ways an overlooked realm to some of these Westerners that saw the ocean as something to be feared.
Yes.
A kind of a border, a boundary. I mean, people will sometimes describe it as island fever, right? The idea that land is your space and the ocean makes you feel claustrophobic. That's not a Hawaiian concept. In Hawaiian mentality, the ocean is part of Aina. I loved you started with Aloha Aina.
Yes.
The ocean is a part of Aina. It's not separate.
It's the extended Aina.
It is. And so for a lot of Hawaiians, the ocean remained a kind of place that they could still practice their culture and still feel a connection to their roots. And because of it, surfing is one of the few cultural activities that really survives this era and this wave of colonization.
What would Hawaii be without surfing? What would Hawaii be if Hawaiians viewed the water like Westerners viewed it, to be feared? Would Hawaii be the same? No way.
Yeah, no one would even be here because in order to get here, Hawaii is one of the most isolated places in the world, and it took a lot of bravery and a lot of akamai'ness, or being smart enough to find and to travel back and forth and to. In fact, when Captain Cook came here in 1778, 1779, he was amazed at how many people lived here, number one, and then the other one was that there were some Tahitians on board his ship, and they could communicate with the Hawaiians in a similar enough language that he realized, wow, these Pacific Island people, they got around the Pacific, and we're only now, venturing into the unknown.
We're late to the party.
Yeah, we're late to the party.
Isaiah, you've written a book, yeah?
I did.
Okay, what's the title of your book?
So the book is called Waves of Resistance, Surfing and History in 20th Century Hawaii.
Waves of Resistance, Surfing and History in 20th Century Hawaii.
Correct.
Okay, and so what is the book about? What's the message?
So the premise of the book is that surfing is a deeply embedded part of Hawaiian culture and history, but also that surfing is a vehicle for Hawaiians to identify with their cultural heritage in the ocean and in the waves. So I mean, there's a lot of things that I argue. I mentioned earlier a little bit about how the ocean is a kind of sanctuary, or pu'uhonua.
Yes.
And then I also talk a lot about what some of the things that happen on land from the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom through a lot of the change that takes place in Hawaii. And I talk about how surfing, how the surfers adapt to that and the things that happen in Hawaii. I spent a lot of time in the 1970s, particularly with what we often call the Hawaiian Renaissance.
Yes.
And so some of the things about the Hawaiian Renaissance that are important are like the canoe hokulea, and kaho'olawe movements.
The reawakening.
Right, and this reawakening of cultural pride. And what I found is that surfing was right in the middle of that as well. And a lot of people were involved with, say, the hokulea. Eddie Aikau was a surfer who was a part of that voyage, and also in a lot of the some of the movements to sort of protect Hawaiian land was led by a guy named John Kelly. And John Kelly had his own surf group of surfers. And so as I investigated further, I realized that surfing was everywhere, and that a lot of surfers especially Hawaiian surfers, were empowered to be involved. And I like to believe that surfing had something to do with that.
I'm sure it did, yeah. Surfing has had an impact on history, a big impact.
Certainly.
Because you also talk in the book about colonialism, yes?
Correct.
And the link that surfing has with colonialism, yeah?
Correct.
Tell us a little bit more about that, please.
Well, at the time when the Hawaiian Kingdom is overthrown, surfing undergoes a kind of resurgence. Although surfing wasn't officially banned like we saw with Hawaiian language and other types of Hawaiian things, surfing did kind of, fewer people were surfing at that time, but a lot of that had to do with the fact that there were, Hawaiians were struggling with disease and trying to survive.
Yeah, trying to stay alive.
With, the overthrow of the Hawaiian government, that there was a resurgence in surfing, and I like, my argument is that there is a correlation. So, and it was with people who were involved, like Prince Jonah Kuhio, for example, was arrested for his involvement in trying to restore the Queen to power. He was an avid surfer. His cousin, Ka'iulani, who was also gave her life essentially to the kingdom and hoping to restore having the kingdom restored. She was an avid surfer. Duke Hanamoku is a young surfer right around that time, and we see like that it becomes a kind of escape for a lot of people, that the ocean is that avenue for them. Now, interestingly, one of the most fascinating things that I found in my research was I was doing some research on the Outrigger Club and its origins, and I didn't realize that at that time when the Outrigger was first formed by a guy named Alexander Hume Ford, that the club was originally, it's a little different today, but back then it was originally a segregated beach club for surfing. And some of the same folks who were overthrowing the Kingdom of Hawaii were surfers involved in this. So the Thurstons and the Doles and some of those others were involved in this club. And I was really fascinated to see that there was some of the tensions that took place on land made their way out into the water. And there's stories of kind of conflict between these two surf clubs. The one surf club is the Outrigger Club, and the other one is the Huinalu Club, which is mostly people like the Kahanamokus and the Hawaiians.
The Kanakas.
Yeah. And I was fascinated that same tension took place in the ocean, where they were kind of battling for who had that space and rights to that space. And the outcome was much different than what happened on land. The Huinalu is able to assert themselves and remain kind of the chiefs in the ocean. I think because of that success, surfing has been seen as kind of independent. Hawaiian surfing, for example, when even to this day, when professionals surf in competition, they're identified as Hawaiian. So, which is unique because, when you're surfing in a competition and you're from California or from Florida, you're American. But only when you're from Hawaii are you seen as Hawaiian.
Right, but we're not talking about an ethnicity.
No,
we're talking a nationality.
Correct.
Yes, exactly right.
Correct.
Exactly right. And that's a huge thing.
It is.
That is a huge thing. So somebody of any ethnicity, if they're a surfer, whether they're Hawaiian, Haole, Asian, whatever. If they're a surfer representing Hawaii, they are listed as Hawaiian.
Correct. Yeah,
wow.
They're representing Hawaii and its nation, and so it's super cool. And I believe that a lot of that independence in the surfing world is because for so many years Hawaiians really worked to preserve surfing as a Hawaiian space.
Yeah. Isaiah, based on what you're saying, I mean, it sounds, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds to me like the overthrow never happened or succeeded out there on the water.
Correct. Yeah, that's
one of the things
my book argues. Yeah.
Only happened where it's dry. Where it's wet, it never happened. And that's what you say in your book.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's a little, I've never thought about it exactly in those words, but basically that's what I argue. Most surfers who come to Hawaii get a different perspective and a different kind of education than those because when you're in the ocean, it becomes pretty apparent that there is a kind of social hierarchy that's different that's on land. I once had a student we went to on a field trip. This is one thing I love about my job. I'd take field trips where we'd go to the surf. And one of their jobs was to observe the social setting in the surfing lineup. We call it a lineup where you sit and you wait for the waves. In Hawaiian, it's the po'ina nalu. So I gave them that assignment, and one student came back, and I really liked this. She said, I was in the water and I saw this one Hawaiian guy, and he was clearly, everyone knew who he was. He was well respected. Whenever the waves came, he was sort of the chief out there. He caught the waves, was talking to people, and nobody would come up and try and take anything from him. She said, then I watched him come in from the beach, put his board on the rack, and walk across the street, and he put on a vest, and he became a bellboy at one of the hotels.
Wow.
She said it instantly switched, where all of a sudden everyone was telling him what to do, and he became subservient. And so just to me, I grew up surfing in Hawaii, and so I was very aware of that. Like, I knew who, like, the chiefs were in the water. But on land, they didn't have the same kind of respect always. And so that's one thing that I think is very important, that social space provides for a lot of our Hawaiians, even still today.
And that really hits you in the gut in the now out, doesn't it?
Right.
Yeah. But it also reminds us, as we've said before here today, that the overthrow didn't happen on the water.
Right.
Because the hierarchy out there is still intact.
Right.
Isaiah, what do you think we can do to get rid of that line that when you cross and you walk out of the ocean back on land, that type of thing doesn't happen, from being the leader out there to being the bellboy over here? How do we solve that?
I think education. I mean, I'm a professor, and so I'm a believer that education is a vehicle for social mobility. Promoting education in our youth, of course, but also just educating visitors and even people who have positions of power in business and other places, that they understand the value of Hawaiian culture and Hawaiian society, and that hopefully we can overcome some of these stigmas or barriers that sometimes are perpetuated on land and that are not perpetuated in the ocean.
We got to admit that there have been changes.
There have
been changes. You know, we were talking earlier, you and I, about how in surfing competitions today, and this is how far it's come, when somebody from Hawaii, regardless of their ethnicity, surfs and represents Hawaii, it's listed as Hawaiian, as in nationality. On the card.
Right, yeah, and I love that. In fact, this really hit me hard once when I was watching a surfing competition. It was a junior Olympics, basically. It was called the ISA, and it was the precursor to the Olympics, and Hawaii had its own team. And there was a junior team, and they ended up winning the whole thing. So the Hawaiian surf team won gold medal, and when they got up to the podiums, because they're trying to imitate the Olympics, they're supposed to play your national anthem. And so there was a moment where I was watching this from my computer screen, because this took place in South America, and I was so proud of our Hawaii kids for surfing and doing so well and winning. But in that moment, it was like a long pause, like, what are they gonna play? And I came to tears actually when they played the Hawaiian national anthem, Hawaii Pono'i.
Yes.
And it was like as if I was transported onto a different timeline in history where the annexation never took place. We're sitting here celebrating the Hawaiian victory as a nation. And you're right, not everybody on the team was indigenous Hawaiian. But that pride of nationality was a really cool experience, and to this day, that the Hawaiian surfing teams in the ISA, they still do really well. In fact, this last year they won again. And same thing with the gold medals and honoring Hawaii. I think what was a challenge, and recently I've really worked hard to try and change this, is that the Olympics, the official Olympics in surfing, was adopted into the Olympics recently. I worked with a bunch of people. We submit an application to the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, hoping that there'd be some way that they would recognize that Hawaii could be seen as different, as independent in the Olympic Games for surfing.
What I'm hearing from our conversation today, Isaiah, is that it's not the politicians. it's the surfers who have made the inroads
Yes.
on a political scale.
Right.
Leave it to the surfers to come up with the solutions for everything. I mean, it's
I
everywhere.
don't know about
you-
everything, but I like that.
Well, I mean, you know, you can go anywhere in the world right now, be driving down the road, and the vehicle in front of you, it may be an RV, it may be a sedan or whatever. Usually there's a sticker on the back that says Surf's Up or some other logo or message related to surfing around the world. You could see that in Kansas. You see it in Texas.
Right.
Places like that. You don't normally think of surfing. So the impact of surfing, not only in Hawaii, but around the world is enormous.
Right.
Enormous. It's amazing. Well, that's where we got to leave it. Thank you so very, very much for being with us today. And please keep doing what you're doing. You know, a lot of people out there are working really hard behind their desks and offices. And I have to say to you, please just keep surfing. Just keep surfing.
I love it. I'll tell my boss that.
Yeah, you tell him I can't teach my class because I got to go out here and teach my class out here.
Love it.
So thank you very much. Mahalo to our viewers. Mahalo to our viewers for joining Isaiah and me today and learning about the impact of surfing. Remember, you can watch us on the web 24/7 on voicesoftruthtv.com, and you can also like Voices of Truth on Facebook. I'm Ehuke Kahu Cardwell for the Kawane Foundation, along with Isaiah here. And until next time, ahui ho.
Ahui ho.
Free Hawaii Broadcasting Network.